Yoga Connection with Zorananda is a deep dive into the world of yoga, exploring the rich history of tradition, methodology, and practices both ancient and modern. Follow along as yoga is explored through solo episodes to guest interviews to understand its vast reach around the world. Hello and welcome to the Yoga Connection. My name is Zorananda, and today we are now diving into the sixth limb of Ashtanga Yoga, Dharana. I just want to recap a little bit and kind of look back at what I've been discussing over the last few episodes, coming from the yamas and yamas, going into asana, going into pranayama and pratyahara, and what the transition is in focus and in experience when we lead up to dharana, and to see that the progression is a move from the kind of gross material side of things and the experience of being a human and utilizing the body and utilizing this biological machine to shift into a whole other experience. And so when we're looking at the yamas and niyamas, they are the placeholders of morality and how we are showing up in the world and how we interact with other people, how we react with the environment. And so the yamas and niyamas are this set of tools to help process how we can exercise a sense of control over our impulses and over the confusion of what's good or bad, right? So say if you're looking at ahimsa, non-harm, to have a sense of control over what kind of harm you are enacting in the world. And some levels of it is unavoidable, right? When it comes to foods that we eat, if we're eating meat or even if we're eating vegetables, there's some level of harm that's taking place in order to fulfill sustenance for ourselves. And so the yoga practice is a continual initiation. We're being initiated into something. There's initiation into practices. There's initiation into knowledge, into wisdom, and into experience. And so what is the experience we're being initiated into? And that experience is a shift of our sense of self, where the initial sense of self is primarily physical. That's really all we know. And over time, in the development of the practice and the development of our sense of self, that there's a shift that starts to occur that pushes us towards a non-physical sense of self. And that's the tricky thing, because it becomes solely subjective. This isn't anything you can prove. I can have a very profound, enlightened experience, and there's no way for me to actually prove it to anyone, because as an internal process, as an internal experience, it is 100% subjective. And the way of having some kind of influence through it is through presence. And that's what we're building up to, is a noticeable presence of something profound. And this is why there are, notable teachers throughout history that have made a significant impact on culture and on society, because their subjective experience is something greater than themselves, has shown through with their presence. And so their presence becomes a signifier of that experience, even though there's no way to actually tangibly prove it. Not like as a physical object or something. You as the human are the physical object. And so this practice will then help hone in on how your presence shows that experience without words, without any way of trying to prove it. And so going from your asana practice into your pranayama practice, the subtlety of the shift starts to present itself, where the physical body has been treated in a particular way to enable being seated for an extended period of time. And once you meet that threshold of being able to have a regular practice, say for an hour a day, and to go from being tight and stiff to relaxed and open, in that relaxed and open state is then where the introduction of more subtle pranayamas and into pratyahara starts to naturally take place. And so I say naturally because in the yoga practice, you don't really need to 100% intend on certain things from happening. Just by doing the work and moving your body and going through the sequence, that sequence will enable your body to open up. You don't have to try to use your mind to convince your body to do it. Just by going through the movements, just by staying with the breath and breathing and being present with the body, that say after a year or two or however many years, that there's a shift that noticeably takes place innately, and it's governed also by the autonomic nervous system, that there are kind of subconscious things that are being built up where all you have to do is focus on doing the practice from beginning to end. And that is what then prepares for the shift through pratyahara, because pratyahara is sense withdrawal, where the practice in the physical practice has served its purpose, that has then gone to the point where your awareness of now energetic exchange is growing, where your sense of self is no longer tied to the physical body, because you're now internalizing your experience. And so who you are as a thing is now shifting more and more into something that doesn't have a form. And so in the state of pratyahara and sense withdrawal, you are now enabling a process of a kind of inward pull energetically. And this is then the precursor for Dharana, which is concentration. You are now shifting from a physical being that's split between all these nervous systems and autonomic and somatic, where a lot of the processes of the energetic exchange is through an unconscious processing, where it's going on behind the scenes. And then the somatic side is just the way that you're able to move the body because of those energetic exchanges, that then through Dharana, you are actively concentrating those energetic processes. You are pulling the energies from the peripheral nervous system into the central nervous system, and you are now concentrating that energy. And that experience is what is subjective to you. And if you were to be seated in a open space with a bunch of people walking around, they're only going to see someone seated with their eyes closed. They're not going to see the process. They're not going to see or even feel that you're going into and starting the concentrative element of the practice. And in your experience, with your eyes closed, concentrating your energy, you can be in a completely crowded space with all kinds of chatter, all kinds of cacophony of noise, and you can tune it all out. And suddenly, even though all that stuff is happening, you can be in this whole other internal world of concentrated energy where the signaling to your ears have been turned off. The signaling to your body has been turned off. The signaling to your smell, all that stuff can be turned off as the shift between your peripheral nervous system and your central nervous system gets turned on, where now the concentrative effect is that you start to get a sense of traveling, that you're traveling internal, you're traveling within yourself. And that traveling is a part of how the energies within your system are concentrating. So if you listen to, I think, my episode on Pratyahara, I was talking about the heart's electromagnetic field. So the shift from your material physical body to then internal, a subjective, non-physical sense of yourself is within that electromagnetic field. And so there comes a point where it almost it acts as a shield, where when your awareness has shifted from physical to non-physical, that all the energy that would go into the senses of the physical have now turned inward into that electromagnetic field, where your sense of self is more identified with that electromagnetic field and its nature than the physical body and its nature. And the concentrative effect is kind of flimsy at first because you're building a capacity, and there is a sense of stamina and endurance that's needed, right? It's just like anything that you do with your body. If you are planning to do a marathon, tomorrow you could wake up and run a marathon, but how well are you going to do? You may finish it, but you'll maybe be dead last, or maybe you won't finish it at all. And so in order to have the endurance and the stamina to run the marathon, you need to prepare yourself. So say if the marathon is whatever, it's like a 10K marathon. Waking up tomorrow and running 10K is going to be brutal. But in the span of 6 months, maybe you run 1K your first day, and 1K the next day, and then 1K, and then 2K, and then 2K, and then 3K. And so when you build up your capacity, when it comes to the marathon, you're then prepared. And that's just common knowledge, right? We all know that. For anything that we do, it is necessary to prepare for it. And just like in a yoga class, I'm not going to teach a very advanced class when I know I'm going to have a mix of beginners and intermediates, that I'm going to give options and I'm going to build up to it. And that's essentially what I've done since January, is that I've introduced a new kind of sequence of teaching, so that I can show the students that over a year of doing this kind of model of class, that there will be a progression, and by the end of the year, they're going to be doing things that they weren't able to do, and that it's necessary to take that time. So in the Dharana limb and in that state, when you are first successfully triggering Pratyahara and getting into concentration, your body is still there. and you're still utilizing the energetics of the body. And so there's still going to be a tie to capacity where you might only be able to withstand a few minutes of concentrating the energetics through the nervous system, where over time we're wanting to meet this threshold where the capacity is self-regulating and it can handle itself, and where then the body can be completely let go of. And our experience then is solely energetic. And this is the tricky part with a podcast like this, and, you know, trying to talk about something that's very ethereal and elusive, right? So it's important to find the kind of material that is going to speak to those experiences in the language that it comes from, right? And so this is why it's important to find yoga masters and authors who are, in my mind, like highly legit, you know. And I think when I look back at the episodes that I did on the 4 ways of yoga, and I was looking at Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois, you know, out of them, I think Iyengar is the best. When I look through his books, the way that he describes the processes of the practice is really brilliant. And so in my own bias with the teachers that I follow, I found that the lineage of Kriya Yoga through Yogananda and Sri Yukteswar and Lahiri Mahasaya, their descriptions and their languaging is really, really brilliant, especially Yogananda. He can describe these states, and he can describe a connection with God or your higher self in a really beautiful way. So I would highly recommend getting books by Yogananda and his teachers, and even Iyengar. And there's just so many more that you can look into. But getting back to Dharana and this whole kind of misconception around meditation and what the word meditation actually means. You know, in the past episodes, I've been getting into this and have shown that the term meditation came from a French monk from the 13th century or the 12th century. And that meditation as a word, meditatione, actually corresponds, I think, more closely to svadhyaya. So if you were to go back to the yamas and niyamas, in the niyamas, svadhyaya, self-study, and the definition of meditation is more so the contemplation of God, and that there are like 4 steps to it. And so when I was doing a little bit of research, and even online, when I look up dhyana, so that's the next limb, dhyana is described as meditation. And I don't know why they do this. And I think it's just because in the grand scheme of things, no one's really looked into where meditation as a word came from and what it was associated with. And I think it's just as an ease of description and an ease of terminology to say, yeah, dhyana means meditation, but it doesn't actually mean meditation. It's from concentration. Dhyana would be expansion. So dhyana would then be the point where you let go of the concentration. So it's like having a rubber band where you pull back on the rubber band and the rubber band tightens and tightens and tightens and tightens. And that tightness is a kind of concentration. It's a buildup of energy, right? So you're pulling this elastic band, pulling to the point where you can let go and it will fly. And I see it the same way between Dharana and Dhyana. That Dharana is the point of concentration where we're pulling this elastic band back and we're enduring the amount of energy that's being contained in that concentration. And so one of the side effects of Dharana is a noticeable quieting of the mind. And this isn't that, and it's not from any overt control. It's not that you're trying to actively control your mind from not talking or not producing images or whatever. It's that the concentration of energy within your electromagnetic field shifts your brainwave states into a state where thoughtlessness is innate, right? So right now in our beta state, thoughtfulness is the innate state, where if you were to just close your eyes, your brain is going to be cycling through things, and it's innate in this brain state. And so when we successfully engage pratyahara, pull energy through our peripheral nervous system into our spine, and that starts to initiate dharana, that the maintenance of dharana, the maintenance of that internalization starts to immediately concentrate. And through that concentration, your brainwave state changes, and you'll see through this like internal imaging, almost as if you have a barrier around you, and the thoughts that seem to be so close and in your brain are suddenly being pushed away from you. And you can start to see and feel the growth of awareness of the electromagnetic field around you. And it's at that point where your experience of yourself completely shifts. That now you're no longer identifying with your body as the thing that you are, that you're identifying with the energetic exchange as the thing you are. That then you can start to witness this electromagnetic field and the concentration within it, and how there will be a triggering point where you've concentrated it so much that it implodes on itself and it immediately expands, and then it pushes the boundaries of your electromagnetic field to now move past your limited sense of self as just, a small bubble in your environment, that you are now integrating with space itself. And that's really the tricky thing, right? That space is a carrier, and it becomes a carrier of you as an expansive consciousness, and you are no longer bound by the tightness of particulates that make up the body. And there's this like noticeable sense of suspended animation, where your body is just suspended in a freeze frame state, and now you're free as consciousness to expand. And I don't want to get into that too much because I'm it's getting into dhyana, and honestly this is probably going to be a shorter episode because there's only so much to talk about when it comes to dharana. And to me, I think I talked about the cities, so they're like the yoga powers, in one of the last 2 episodes. This is where the yoga powers start to come in. And the analogy that I like is that of like a light bulb, okay? When you have a light bulb in a room and you stare at the light bulb and you look away, there's like an after image. And the after image stays and slowly dissipates. So think of dharana as that same effect, that you are concentrating all this energy, right? And so when you've met your threshold of capacity, you come back to your body, and then there's like an afterglow that occurs. So it's like staring at a light and then being like, okay, I can't handle this anymore. I've got to look away. And then you look away, there's the after image, and then that after image slowly dissipates. So I think of it the same way, that when we're truly getting into quote unquote meditation, that we've triggered pratyahara, we're in dharana, we're concentrating, we meet our threshold, and through our sense of self of being an energetic being, we go, okay, I still have a limitation here, and there's still a tie to my body, and I'm coming back to my body. And then you're back to your body, but then there's a noticeable presence of that concentration. And people notice these things, whether they want to like say it outright or they're thinking it to themselves, that when you are actively concentrating the energetics of your being into a sense of non-physicalness, that will have an effect on your environment. That rather than being in your like normal mundane beta state that everybody is in, you going into a concentrated state and then releasing that energy through your system and then interacting with people, they notice that difference. There is a contrast, because for the most part, everybody around you is in the same beta state. They're in the same energetic capacity. And so that's why we can all just kind of walk past each other and not really notice each other, but we'll notice someone who stands out. And in this case of, you know, someone being like, I want to say like more spiritual, that doesn't really sound right, but more concentrated, that they stand out. And that can show up in many different ways. That doesn't necessarily mean have to be in this like kind of guru doesn't have to be in this kind of like guru-esque state. There's many different ways where, you know, someone can stick out, right? If it's like a massive bodybuilder, or even like a homeless person that's lashing out, right? That we have these examples of someone doing something out of the ordinary that's not in the kind of like minutia of the mundane, of the collective kind of like regular bystander, that you're going to have these outliers. But in this particular instance, that when someone is deliberately putting themselves into a concentrated state of energy, that there is a noticeable effect on the people in the world around, that they'll take note in some way that is unique. And it's different than seeing a homeless person that's like high on drugs, or someone who's really, really big and fit, and they kind of stand out in the world, right? Where then the person who is highly spiritual and very connected to their energetics, and they are actively putting their presence through their energetics into the world, that there's a different kind of triggering effect. And it's my belief that you can influence people's timelines this way. That there can be this synchronicity where you are adding a kind of goodness to people's lives, and it's being accepted and integrated because it's non-invasive. It's not that you're trying to come up to a person that, like, you're a conspiracy theorist and you're trying to convince somebody that the government did this, there's secret societies that are doing this, NASA is run by this kind of group and this, and the earth is flat. And, like, you're trying to use your words as conviction to change someone's ideology and to change someone's way of thinking, where then the highly spiritual, concentrated being can walk into a room and interact with people energetically and make small changes to their consciousness in a non-invasive way, and intuitively the people interacting with it are agreeing with it because they're in the same room together, and there's like a loveliness to that person, that when that person is, just as they interact, as they speak, they don't have to try to speak about truth. The truth is just embedded in their words. And it can be something as simple as, hey, I really like your dress. You look great. And in that compliment, encoded in is this like highly concentrated energy that then goes into that person. And because the compliment was sincere and it was accepted, there's another packet of information, there's another packet of energy that then goes into that person, where then it can actually help change something in their psychology about themselves. And that's really the subtle work of the yogi, and why it's important to do this kind of work as an everyday person, and that you don't have to become this kind of guru-like person where you get all these followers. That this work that you're doing on yourself, and to evolve your consciousness, to go away from the kind of like basic mundane NPC way of thinking to a more highly in tune human that is embedding this beneficial energy into the environment that they're in. And that can be wherever you work. And this is why I'm such a strong advocate in fulfilling the karma of your life, meaning that if you're a plumber, if you work in a grocery store, if you work in a bank, if you're work at a gas station, wherever you work, that you can add these yoga practices, you can add Ashtanga Yoga, you can add the awareness of your spiritual self while still doing the work that you do, and that you're adding it to that environment. And so the people that you interact with are going to be benefiting from it. You're going to be benefiting from it because you're in that state and you're actively practicing it. And then you're embedding it into the world immediately that you're in. And if that grants you an opportunity to then grow as a person in developing this ability of increasing your capacity of energetic exchange, that can definitely lead to wanting to teach yoga, wanting to do retreats, wanting to do seminars. And then the evolution of who you are as a person isn't based on a kind of neglect where you're going from workplace to workplace and you're saying, oh, I hate it here. And, I don't want to deal with this stuff anymore. So I'm going to quit and I'm going to get a new job. And then you just hop from job to job, where being in that workplace and doing everything you can to succeed in that workplace, do the best that you can, really put that concentrated energy into it, is a signaling to the universe that you'll be able to then increase your capacity even more to take yourself out of that environment into a new environment where it's an upgrade, rather than being like, oh, I hate this job, so I'm going to go get a new job. But you're just kind of starting over. So you're actually really only circling and cycling into the same, in the same level, even though you're getting a new job, getting a new job, getting a new job, getting a new apartment, getting a new partner, getting a new dog, getting a new this, getting a new this. You're just cycling, and you're just on a kind of conveyor belt or a track, staying in the same place. where yoga is saying, stay here, do everything you can to be highly successful in what you're doing here, embed all this beneficial, potent, concentrated energy into it, and that will just crack open opportunity. Where that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be opportunity in that workplace that I kind of climb a ladder, that there will be a synchronicity that because you've been really resonating on this concentrated energy, that you meet someone somewhere and then they say, hey, well, why don't you join me on this, or why don't you do this, or suddenly your life path starts to open up and you're no longer operating on the sense of abandoning your karma because you're upset with it, right? Or, you are just living in stagnance. The shift from Dharana to Dhyana is now a shift of dimension. So in my experience and in my opinion, Dharana is one of the most difficult points in this because it is unknown territory. To go from being physical to non-physical, there is this kind of like void of experience because we've only known physical. The only time that we become non-physical is when we go to sleep and we become completely unconscious, right? We are literally existing as nothingness for 5 to 8 hours every night. And so in that void is where Dharana comes into effect, and where we are exploring a part of our experience that we are normally completely unconscious of. And so navigating this becomes really weird because we don't have a point of reference. And the only point in that experience of unconsciousness is when we are brought into a dream state, that we're pulled out of the unconsciousness, we're in a dream state, and then from the dream state, we're coming into our bodies and full physical consciousness. And so to be able to trace our steps from conscious to unconscious, from physical to non-physical, and to remain aware, initially is like perturbing. It's really uncomfortable, and it's because of how like uncertain it is that what we're doing is accurate in some way. And so part of the endurance and the stamina is navigating the uncertainty with confidence, and that the confidence is coming from the way that we are relaxed and at peace and content. And so this is where the yamanas and yamas are really important. And this is really how they act as a foundation for the exploration. Because when we can enable contentment and peacefulness, that we're at peace with where our body is. We don't need to move it. We don't need to feed it. We don't need to sleep. We don't need to drink water. We're completely content with exactly how it is. Even if we feel a little itch somewhere, we're content in not moving, being completely still. That in the concentrative effect of Dharana, that concentration is starting to shed light on that process that we go through, going from our waking state to our complete deep sleep state. that in that trajectory of becoming unconscious, that even though that process is happening to the body, that the mind is still staying within awareness. And the mind being in awareness is enabling the concentration of the energy within the body, so that the body can go from conscious to unconscious, but then the mind is staying within consciousness. And in the yoga practice, like, this is called super consciousness. And in this super consciousness, you have now access to a new dimension of existence. And that what you see and what you experience is going to be wildly different. And there is a kind of gatekeeping of this. There's a protective element. And in that new dimension, in that new world, there are ascended masters and enlightened beings who are protecting that realm. They just don't want anybody going into it. And that's why yoga is so initiative. And, there are probably well over 100 million yoga practitioners in the world, probably even more. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every single one of these yoga practitioners have access to this kind of knowledge and have access to these kind of experiences. And that's just simply because they've only taken the practice to so far, that it's still within their mind that their yoga practice is part of their daily routine in their life, that they go to work, they go to the yoga studio, they do yoga, they come home, they shower, they have dinner, they go to bed, rinse and repeat. Where out of that 100 million plus people, there's really only a handful that understand, okay, when I sit and I do my yoga practice, I'm enabling this shift in my consciousness, so that when I finish my practice and I go to sit down to meditate, that I am engaging in this initiation, that I'm initiating now my consciousness to shift from being in a physical state of awareness to then in a non-physical state of awareness, and I'm gaining access to these higher realms. And a lot of my focus right now, what I've been thinking about is how in Christianity there is this assumption that yoga equates to demon possession, and that it's in that state of openness where you're going to invite all kinds of beings. But that's absolutely not true. That the processes that are involved are innately geared towards connecting to your higher self and a sense of divinity. And that any kind of invitation for something darker to come out is usually intended. That there are practitioners who are doing that to intend on inviting in darker forces. But in all of the scriptures of yoga, they all say, don't do that. They all say, this is for you to connect to divinity. And there are these deities that act as gatekeepers that help you go through the process. And that's why it's so initiative. And that there are step-by-step initiations, that when you start the yoga practice, that you are introduced to it, or you are eventually introduced to a teacher, then that teacher is going to give you a protocol. They're going to get you to do some cleanses. They're going to get you to do certain asanas and certain pranayamas. And then once you get to that point, and then your body is shaped and you've, cleared out any pathology for disease to settle in, that now you are given certain mantras, you're given more breathing techniques, you're given certain things to focus on, and then you're led to a point where, okay, you're now going into this state of dharana and concentration, and that concentration is to then be able to expand it into a sense of divinity, where then your experience has shifted from a physical to a non-physical. You have now entered into a realm where the ascended masters and the advanced yoga masters reside, and then there's a new initiation, and you are now interacting with these beings who are going to teach you new practices and new experiences within that realm. And this is essentially what all enlightened yoga masters go through, that they enter into some kind of realm at some point, they interact with ascended masters, and then they're brought back and they are given these cities and these powers. And that's really the power, is that the potent, that their energetic concentration is so potent that in their electromagnetic field, they are able to manipulate the environment around them. And this is where then you get miracles, that people are able to perform certain things, where, there's stories of yoga masters who can like levitate and fly and be telekinetic, and they can manifest anything at will. They can manifest all kinds of money. If they need to build something, they can manifest food. They can do all these crazy things. And it sounds perplexing and it sounds like way too far-fetched, but that's just because majority of the people are operating in the beta wave state, in their mundane state, where that state and dimension of existence doesn't allow for those things. And that's all that it is. It's not that the telekinesis and the manifestation things is impossible and that can't be done. It's just that the state of being you need to be in takes certain initiations, because you need to prove yourself for that. And that's why just the everyday person doesn't have access to that stuff, that you can't just wave your hand over an object and watch it like levitate and fly across the room. It's because there are protocols involved in order to get to that point. And that's really the whole purpose of distinguishing between what a typical yoga practice is and what an initiated yogi's yoga practice is. That they're really two different worlds. And within all of that, Dharana is the next state of initiation to go deeper and towards yourself. And into a place where then you can interact with enlightened beings. And that's really getting into the next step, right? Because it's really no different than if, say, pick any sport, right? Say if you're a hockey player or you're a soccer player. Let's say you're a soccer player. Just because you play soccer doesn't mean you get to sit in the same room as Ronaldo or Messi or Ronaldinho or, whoever. Likewise with the NBA, likewise with tennis, likewise with anything. The only way that you can be sitting in a room with the top of the line athletes of those sports is you have to be operating at their capacity. If you're just kicking a soccer ball around for fun, you're going to be kicking around a soccer ball for fun with everybody else who's around you, just doing it for fun. But if you're wanting to be in the upper echelons, you're not only just kicking it around. You started soccer when you were 3. You've been playing in leagues since you were 5. You go to a special school for it, and that's all you do every day, all day, in order to get to that point. It's really no difference than if you're a yoga practitioner and you're wanting to get into the upper echelons of the yogis, right? It's not that you're trying to get into the upper echelon of the Instagram yogis. You're wanting to get into the upper echelon of the non-physical, beyond this dimension yogis, because they do exist in there. Those are the Yoganandas and the Sri Yukteswars and the yogis of the past who have ascended into those places. And you have access to them as long as you can successfully get into these states through not only the asana practice and the pranayama, but through pratyahara and sense withdrawal, then into dharana, and then finally into the next states of dhyana and samadhi. And that you're really only going to be able to sit at the table of these ascended masters when you've successfully gotten through samadhi. And that's really difficult, especially if you're thinking that meditation is, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to quiet my mind for 10 minutes. That's not going to cut it. That's not enough. And we're dealing with yogis from the past who had 12-hour sadhanas, like literally every day, all day. They would wake up at 3 a.m. They would meditate for an hour, 2 hours. They would do a physical practice. They would do their cleansing. They would do their chanting. Then they would go and do seva. They would do some kind of karma work in their community, helping build things, helping with people, giving lectures, whatever it is. Then when the evening comes, they do more chanting and more singing and dinner and meditate and then go to bed. And a lot of these yogis would sleep for 2 to 3 hours, and that's it. And that's because they look at their entire day and night and existence in that experience as a complete surrender and submission to divinity through their actions. And so they're not only in dharana in their seated practice, they're in dharana and concentration all day. That they are concentrating that energy and that potency and putting it out into the world all day. That's what their focus is. And the fulfillment of their karma is doing what they're called to do all throughout the day. And where there's a balance between the structure of, okay, I wake up, I do my meditation, I do my practice, I do my cleansing, I do my chanting, and I eat a meal, and then what God calls for me to do is what I'm going to do in my karma. And as Westerners, what God is calling you to do is to work your job. What God is calling you to do is to be creative and live your passion. And it's a balance of all of that. And if you can really hone in on spending time on concentrating your energies internally in this very potent subjective experience, you'll see how your presence of divinity becomes amplified more and more. So I think that's all I have in me for today. Again, these last ones are a bit tricky to really flesh out. It's at the point where you're just gonna have to do it. And if you would like some kind of package, if you'd like some kind of video or something that I can put together to help, please message me and ask me. I drill this in every episode. Send me messages. Follow me on Instagram, Yogi Zorananda. Send me an email on my website, zorananda.com. Ask me questions. Ask for things, because if I get people who want this stuff and they say, hey, I actually want a practice, can you send me a video on getting through all this stuff, I'll happily do it. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening. As always, links to everything will be in the description. I've been noticing my podcast growing, which is really nice. Usually my numbers are around, I'll get a few downloads a day. To recently I'll see like 50 downloads a day, 30 downloads a day. And that is so awesome to see. And please, I want to offer this stuff for free as much as I can. I don't want to monetize this stuff. You know, even when I think about at any point this podcast blows up and, you know, I'm getting thousands of downloads, that I'm still hesitant on doing ads. And if I were to do ads, it'll be not through like an ad agency like you'll see on most podcasts, where they just, you know, will have ads for anything, where I would rather pick who I'd want to support. So if it's like a friend's company, or if it's, you know, something that I'm like really, really love and I would really love people to invest in, I think I'm going to go that way. But I would still love to see people reaching out and asking questions, just to help with building the community. And yeah, I think that is it. Just feel I'm more so rambling at this point. But again, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy.